I feel blessed. So yes, Jeremy Windsor. I'm a consultant in anaesthetics and critical care at Chesterfield Royal, and I am a senior lecturer in mountain medicine. I'm the director of a new institute in mountain medicine at UCLan, the University of Central Lancashire, where I spend a day a week lecturing and supporting our masters and diploma students. I'm going to take a look with a crystal ball tonight at what I call mountain medicine. Now, mountain medicine means different things to different people, but essentially at UCLan, our job is to support pre-hospital physicians, mountain rescue teams, wilderness medical responders, people who work as volunteers in the medical capacity for events and races throughout the mountains. And I hope I'll demonstrate that actually mountain medicine is an important and growing speciality. Now, normally this talk can be quite sober, but given that it's Friday night, what I thought I'd do is, if I'm permitted, is to perhaps interrupt the talk every now and again with an anecdote or two, just to lighten things up. Everybody's had a glass of wine, and therefore we're ready for talks. So, as has already been said, I spent the best part of 11 years as a registrar in training. Now, there'll be several of you out there who are probably deans of various medical schools and are frowning and shaking your heads. But I can't encourage enough a long registrar training period. Having been a consultant for 10 years now, I realise there's not much going back once you become a consultant, and trying to delay it as long as possible is a good thing. So I spent 10 years, 11 years, spending 6 months in the UK, training, and then 6 months abroad in what's called the Greater Ranges. So it would be the Andes, the Himalayas, North American Rockies, those sort of areas. It didn't start well, and I've got to say, I'm not a natural at high altitude. I'm somewhat clumsy and don't tend to do well in hypoxia. My first experience, which was in Peru, my 10 years of Himalayan mountaineering is just a catalogue of failures, effectively, and partial successes. The only success I can really claim is that I'm still here to tell the tale. But in reality, what it meant was long periods of time spent acclimatizing at 3, 4, 5, 6,000 meters and spending an awful lot of time sitting around the campfire, not doing much. And certainly on my first expedition, we didn't know whether we were coming or going. We were led up by local porters and guides and led back down again. But that sort of got better over time. But there was a period in the middle of my Himalayan experience where I was a bit gung-ho and I was sort of losing my way a little bit. I remember one event which sort of really brought me down to earth. I was on a summit day. We must have been at 6,500, 7,000 meters, just two of us, a friend of mine, and we got stuck in a storm very, very high up, and we pulled out the tent and we sat in the tent, and in the middle of the night I needed to go to the loo. I stepped out to go to the loo, came back in, didn't think anything more of it, and then for the next 2 or 3 days this awful smell followed me around all of the campsites, to the summit and back down, even to base camp. And it was only after about the 4th day did I realise that actually during a very windy summit day, when I'd been to the loo, I'd crouched down and the wind had been so prolific that what I passed per rectum got blown into the hood of my down suit. And so for effectively 3 or 4 days, there was a freeze-thaw cycle going on, so that the smell would disappear during the freezing time, but then it would reappear as it melted. And yeah, just when I thought I was becoming this great Himalayan climber, I realised that wasn't the case. Anyway, let's get back to basics. I'm going to concentrate very much on the UK tonight, and what we're going to look at is the mountains. Now, different things to different people. There are lots of, let me get this slide machine working. It's always the first slide, isn't it? Getting the first slide off and running. If I'm patient, it'll work. So look, there are dozens of different names or definitions of British mountains, okay? Some of them you will remember, you'll recognise. Those of us out there who are keen on Scotland, the Munros and the Donalds, and what's the third one? The Corbetts. So the 3,000-foot mountains in Scotland, the 2,500-foot mountains, the 2,000-foot mountains. But there's lots of other names for the Lakes Mountains. So there are Wainwrights, there are, what else are there? There are the Burkitts, the Dodds, Lots of different names. You probably won't remember, won't recognise the Ethels. The Ethels are the Peak District mountaintops. I'm a firm collector, eager collector of Peak District tops, and there are 92 Peak District tops named after Ethel Haythornthwaite, who was one of the initiators behind the National Park formation in the Peak District. But there's lots of other ones that you may or may not recognise, named after various self-important people who've named things after themselves. But we're going to concentrate on sims. That's the international definition of a mountain. So a sim is a 600-metre mountain, has a prominence 30 metres. So the top stands 30 metres above any other land in its surrounding area. Anybody hazard a guess how many sims there are in the UK? Don't worry, you're not going to lose any money. 500? 7? Oh, good, okay. So, maybe in Lincolnshire. But there's a few. So the grand total is actually 2,755 in the British Isles. There's one on the Isle of Man. Has anybody climbed the one on the Isle of Man? No. Yes? In the Scouts. It still counts, still counts. The vast majority are in Scotland, but there are a good smattering around Ireland, England and Wales. And yes, one in the Isle of Man. Where's the most southwesterly? Anybody? What's on Dartmoor? Is it Mount-Tor? Yeah. In the Peak District, there's only a couple. There's Kinder Scout and Mount-Tor on Bleaklow. But there's one, yeah, I think it goes as far as Dartmoor qualifies. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe I'm making that up. But anyway, over 2,500, the majority of which are distributed through our national parks. So, it's quiz night. Who can name one of our UK's national parks? Anybody? North Yorkshire National Park. Yeah, there it is in the top right-hand side. A very, yes. The Yorkshire Dales National Park, yes. Sorry? The Cairngorms, the most further north. Sorry? The Brecon Beacons of old. Yeah, yeah. Snowdonia. Northumberland. Pembrokeshire. Lake District. Dartmoor. What's this one? This one? New Forest. Not many mountains there. Yes. Have we missed anything? I think we've covered the 15. Yes, Northumberland. 15. Vast majority of our UK mountains are situated in those areas, and in addition in the far northwest of Scotland. So what I'm going to talk about is how the pattern of injuries and illnesses have changed and are changing in the mountain environment. It's not a static problem, it is evolving. And I'm going to try and answer that by looking at 4 aspects to try and convince you that the picture of injury and illness in the mountains is changing, and therefore, as a group of practitioners of mountain medicine, we have to change and evolve. So let me focus on the first one, the activity that we undertake. I'm sure many of you do this sort of thing. Which fools out there are mountain bikers? Yes. Keep your hands up if you've not had a significant injury mountain biking. Okay, most hands go down, but there's still a few survivors at the back. Good. So activity, very, very important. But the question is, what activities do we undertake in the UK? And to answer that, we move a little bit further than the world of mountain medicine and start digging a little bit into epidemiology. I've taken this as an example, the Active Lives report from 2021. This is the first survey that was done after the COVID, towards the end of the COVID pandemic. The Active Lives survey is conducted twice a year. It asks for reports from a large population in England and reports back on a biannual basis. It's all adults, so it's 18 plus. I don't think there's an upper age limit. And there's another parallel report that's for children that's done every year, I think. And what it tries to determine is how active is our UK population and what is it doing? What is that population doing? So here's a question for you. Amongst adults in the UK, aged over 18, let's take in England, what percentage of adults are active? Now, the survey defines active as 150 minutes of activity a week. So some people that might sound a lot. 10 or 20%. 45. You're underplaying your population. A bunch of active, engaged. Let's have a look. So, 61% of the UK of the English adult population are active. They're doing 150 minutes. They're lying. They need to be monitored. But bear in mind, you've got a population there of nearly 40% who are doing less than 150 minutes of activity a week. Now that's, getting on for 20 minutes or less. And activity counts as walking, housework, general active activity. It is not running marathons. So that's across the board. Different socioeconomic groups will be different. What are they doing? Well, in the post-COVID world, in the months after COVID ended, this was a sort of pattern of what people were doing. Because of COVID, people were taking less active travel to work. So this green figure had fallen, and people having more time at home were walking for leisure more. But effectively, the runners, the cyclists, the swimmers, those in team sports were sort of hovering by a few 100,000, but effectively were fairly constant. So what we take from that in terms of mountain medicine is that we've got a lot of walkers out there in the hills. And certainly in subsequent reports, people are still walking more than they did pre-COVID. So there's a lot more walkers out there. There's a steady number of people running, a steady number of people cycling. There's some swimmers, and we'll talk about swimming out in the mountains in a minute. But that's the sort of pattern that we're seeing. So, overwhelmingly, that's the picture. We've got the swimmers, we've got some paragliders out in the hills, we've got some climbers and some mountaineers. But the overwhelming number of people in the UK's mountains are walkers and, to a lesser extent, runners, cyclists and swimmers. But what they're doing and how they're doing it is changing. The arrival of new technology means that people are doing different things in different ways and exposing themselves into different risks. So take a mountain bike, for example. So there's an older population now with chronic comorbidities to some degree, doing adventure mountain biking that they weren't doing 10, 20, 30 years ago. And there's some really good work out there, epidemiological work, that's looking at injury amongst mountain bikers and e-bikers in particular. And it's almost the perfect storm. You've got older people with chronic medical illnesses and injuries doing harder things. So they're exposing themselves to significant traumatic injuries, but not having the physiological wherewithal that the teenagers and 20-somethings have. And there's some really interesting cases, especially from North America, of some very severe injuries occurring as a result of that, and complicated by people's backgrounds. But technology is working in many different ways in the mountains. If you think of the activities that you do in the hills and think about how they've changed over the last 10 years, technology has played a big part. So, for instance, you've got kayakers now who can put their kayak in their rucksack and walk to a high lake to paddle. You've got people who can paddleboard now, who paddleboarded 10 years ago? We didn't, did we? But they can put the paddleboard in the backpacks and off they can go. You've got boulderers and climbers who are climbing with lighter kit than ever before. Bouldering mats are getting lighter and easier to carry. It seems activity after activity is becoming easier and is allowing people to push themselves further. This is a really good example. I mentioned it just before. Swimming. The explosion of wild swimming over the course of the last 10 years has been universally welcomed. The opportunity for people to get out into the hills who may not be walkers, may not be climbers, may not be cyclists, but they found their niche, their passion in wild swimming. And that has largely been facilitated by the availability of very narrow, thin wetsuits. So people are swimming in 3, 4, 5 millimeter wetsuits. And the arrival of tow floats as well has given people the support and the safety that they didn't have before. And now it's become a really big thing. And we're seeing that as a consequence, mountain rescue teams are being called out at times to mountain lakes in order to treat people who've had difficulties in the water or have become hypothermic and got out of the water, haven't been able to warm themselves. So we see a new technology, we see a group of people adopting that technology and the complications that can ensue from it. With the change in technology has also come a change, I suppose, in attitudes and connections. Never before have we been better connected to other people. This is a photo taken from something called the Frog Graham Challenge. You might have heard of the Bob Graham Challenge, which I had the dubious honour of doing back in May, which is the 65-mile round trip across the lakes, 42 tops. This is the Frog Graham. This is 4 swims across the lakes over a 40-mile section, completed in a single day's push. And now I think there are the best part of 300 or 400 people who've done that. There's a website dedicated to it. There's social media. There's training groups, and people are going out and adopting these sort of hybrid sports. So things that involve swimming and running, or running and climbing, or running and cycling, swimming and cycling. All manner of different sports are being brought together by the power of social media. And we see that not only with new inventions like the Frog Graham, but also then the old sort of challenges that we all knew about, the 3 Peaks, the Fred Whitten Challenge, the big cycle ride around the Lake District. So even new events and old events are becoming increasingly popular, and larger numbers of people are attending. I did the Frog Graham last year, and it took me about 21 hours to get round in a continuous journey. And it's incredible what a challenge does for your sense of judgment. I got to the final crossing of Wastwater, so that crosses to and finishes near Keswick. It's Wastwater, isn't it? Just outside Keswick. Derwentwater. Thank you. Sorry, Southerner not getting his titles right. Yes, I remember getting in the water as it was getting dark to do a 2-kilometre swim on a route that I didn't know, with nobody with me, in the rain, thinking, yeah, this is a good idea. This is a really good, sensible idea. I'm going to do this. It's okay, because I think I can do it breaststroke, so I'll be able to see anything that comes in my way. And I knew there were 3 islands on the crossing, so I'll hit the islands, it'll be fine. I did hit the islands, but all I had to go on were the headlamps of occasional cars driving into Keswick as it went past. And I had the carry sack, and I told my mum, I'd phoned my mum that I was just about to get in the water. And as I was going across, obviously her patience ran out, and she started ringing. I could hear this, and I couldn't really answer the phone in the water, but I could hear it in the waterproof sack. I eventually got over to the other side, hypothermic, hardly able to dress myself, and in fact turned the wrong way, not into Keswick, down towards Borrowdale. Yeah. And thinking, am I going the right way? And I had to ask somebody, is this the way to Keswick? She said, no, it's that way. It's 180 degrees that way. But it's interesting the challenge, what you do when you're faced with a challenge. So lots of different challenges are available. We've mentioned the Frog Graham. This one is one that we devised in the Peak District. Those of you who are climbers will be aware of Classic Rock, the famous rock climbing book, 100 routes, best routes in the UK. There is 12 routes in the Peak District, and there is the Peak District Classic Rock Challenge. So you will cycle between the 12 climbs and climb it. And these are 2 of our best Peak District climbers. They're not cyclists, as you can see, but they're the wide boys, for those who you know. And they set the record of 12 climbs over the course of 40 miles in about 8 or 9 hours on a tandem. And they carried the tandem up the cliff face and climbed, leaving the bike behind, and then returned. And these sort of challenges have only started to materialize with the arrival of social media and a wider technological expansion. So that's activities. Let's have a look now at people. Second factor in looking at injuries and illnesses in the mountain is the people and what's going on in them. Now, during COVID, I worked in an intensive care unit. And one of the things that really, really struck me as we saw a large population of 30, 40 and 50 somethings coming into our critical care unit was just how much comorbidity there is in young people. And it was a real sense that there were a lot of very unhealthy young people around. And they came a cropper certainly in that first wave of COVID. And that's been illustrated by the British cohort study. So those who'd be familiar with it, the British cohort study is from UCL, University College London. The cohort study was first started in 1970 and it recruited 17,000 newborn children over the course of a week in 1970 and has followed them through each year since. And I think there's getting on for 200 or 300 publications that's come out of the cohort study. But what it really does is captures what the middle-aged group are going through. So what they found amongst those 17,000 people, and that's dwindled over the course of the years, but the population they studied in 2019-20, so when they were about 48, 49 years of age, was that a third of those people had at least 2 chronic health problems. So that's a third of people with chronic health problems. And these commonest problems, a quarter had high-risk drinking problems, a fifth had recurrent back problems, 20% had mental health problems. At the moment of completing the survey, there was a background of hypertension, asthma, arthritis, as you would think. But high-risk drinking was a very, very common problem. And this doesn't include long COVID, doesn't include obesity, it doesn't include osteoporosis or diseases that the person can't provide information for in the questionnaire. So this is a snapshot of the middle-aged population in the UK. So there are problems aplenty, and these are the very people who are going into the hills. So they're going into the hills, and they're going into the hills with these problems. So I'll just spend a moment just talking about a study that will be familiar to many, many of you, but it always strikes a note whenever I read it of just the degree of psychiatric morbidity that is around in the UK. And that's had a real impact on mountain rescue teams. If you go through any mountain rescue team report, the annual reports that they're all obliged to publish, you will see countless accounts of people being call-outs being called out for people with mental health problems, from the person who is having a mental health crisis and needs to go out in the outdoors just for some space and gets lost or gets disorientated, or families start worrying and the mountain rescue team go out and call them, right the way through to people who go out and decide to take their own lives in the mountain. A very close friend of mine was running down a peak in the lakes a couple of years ago, just after COVID. And as he was coming, he was about a kilometre above the car park, spotted an older gentleman on the other side of a fence, sitting down, and thought, it just seems odd. And he crossed over the fence and went to the gentleman who was sitting down. He was probably in his late 70s, early 80s. He was just sitting there looking straight ahead. The sun was starting to go down. It was sort of May time. And the man looked at my friend and was very, very flustered. He was very upset. He said, just go away, just leave me, just go away. And my friend just sort of sat with him and just waited for him just to calm down. And they just started chatting about the sunset and what they were doing. And it turned out the man himself had decided to come to a place and to take an overdose, to take his own life. So he was sitting, he thought, out of view, and had a series of tablets to take, and he was going to take them. And he'd written a note, he'd left a message for his best friend at home, he'd left his car in the car park with the keys in the ignition, and he had decided that evening, his wife, I think his wife had died very, very recently, and he decided he had metastatic prostate cancer. He was not going to carry on with his life, and he was going to go out into the hills. He was not going to be disturbed. He was going to find a quiet place, and he was going to take his tablets. and he was going to be left there. And he'd left messages for the mountain rescue team to retrieve him the next day, and he made it very clear that he didn't want any intervention. And my friend sat with him, and he sat with him for about an hour or so. And my friend decided that the gentleman was able to make those decisions himself. He made a clear plan. He didn't feel that he could get involved, and actually left him. Actually made the decision that after an hour or two's of conversation, that he was going to leave him. And in fact, he did in fact take his life that night. And the mountain rescue teams over and over again are seeing this. Our Edale Mountain Rescue Team retrieved, I think about 10 fatalities last year, the majority of whom had taken their own lives. So it is an ongoing issue, and you can imagine it's a very stressful issue for the mountain rescue teams. We've just done a really interesting piece of work with a Lake District mountain rescue team, where we've looked at, if you're a mountain rescue team member, you carry a bleep and you're sent a message if you're available to come out for a rescue. And it contains a little bit of information about the situation, and then you respond. And we've done a really interesting bit of work, I think, where we look at the response of mountain rescue teams to a call-out. And when it comes to a mental health call-out, volunteers are more reluctant to come out for a mental health call-out because of the potential of what they might encounter. Mountain rescue team members feel very uncomfortable, quite rightly, because they're not trained as mental health professionals to deal with mental health crises out in the mountains. And that's it. And so we're starting to see that in the research that we're doing. And as a result, the answer to that is then to provide psychological first aid and mental health training and support to mountain rescue teams. So an ongoing problem that I think will only get bigger in the hills. So look, let's get back to another spoke in the wheel, if you like. We've talked about activities. We've talked about medical history. Let's talk about location. Let's get back to the mountains. So this is the third component. So we're going to talk about weather. That's what we're going to talk about. Now, who remembers July the 19th, 2022? What were you all doing on the warmest day ever recorded in the UK? Was anybody in Lincolnshire that day at RAF Coningsbury, where the temperature of 40.3 degrees was recorded? I mean, Lincolnshire must have been one heck of a place to be that day. But even in Keswick, in the mountains, it was 32 degrees in Keswick, which, if we look at the temperature charts, these are the average temperature charts in Keswick. Red is maximum daytime temperature, blue is minimum temperature. So July's maximum temperature is 18 degrees in Keswick. So it's 32 degrees that day. Our world is changing. The climate emergency is going to result in warmer temperatures and wetter conditions. We're going to see dramatic changes. I think we're seeing them already. 32 degrees in Keswick. What did that mean to those people on the top of Scafell that day? I mean, they were probably faced with temperatures of 25, 26, 27 degrees. I remember being out in the Peak District around that time, and the sheep didn't know what to do. If they went high, they thought it would be cooler, but they had no shelter and had no shade. If they went low, they were boiling hot. And there were sheep. I went out for a walk late one evening, and a series of sheep were just lying on their backs. What do you do when you've got 6 inches of wool on you, in 32 degrees? But it's a real issue, and it's going to be an ongoing issue for us in the mountains. Now, we tend to think that these high temperatures, that the complication that we're going to see medically is heat illness. It's going to be sunstroke. It's going to be heat-related problems. But the reality is, what you're going to see in your emergency department when there's 32 degrees is not those conditions. It's going to be exacerbations of chronic medical problems. It's going to be people with COPD, it's going to be people with asthma, it's going to be people with cardiac disease who are struggling with the high temperatures. So yes, there will be the sunstroke, but there'll be a much wider impact on people with chronic medical problems as well. We'll also see a growing change in mental health problems, as we mentioned. We'll also start seeing, I'm sure of it, an increase in tick-borne diseases in the UK. As it becomes warmer and wetter, we're seeing cases now in East Anglia of the first case of tick-borne encephalitis. We will see greater numbers as there is a migration of bugs across from Northern Europe. We will see those differences. So a whole manner of different things we'll see in the short and medium term. And in the long term, we'll start seeing more skin cancers, we'll start seeing more cataracts, we'll see problems from long-term sun exposure. All of this will play into, as I say, the mountain environment. So that's the warm. Let's talk about the wet. Now, this is meant to be the wettest part of England, isn't it? This is sprinkling tarn. Now, I don't know if I believe it, but I've seen this in a couple of sources. 2.5 meters of rain a year. Does that make sense? It seems an awful lot, but I've seen it on account more than once. I have to admit, I've never been up there in the dry. Sprinkling tarn, it certainly does sprinkle, doesn't there? Yeah. Now we know that the majority of UK's mountains lie on the west coast. It's a warm bundle of moist air hitting a cold mountain, and when it does that, with the prevailing southwesterlies, it'll hit the mountains and it'll fall as rain. That's what happens. If only the UK's mountains were on the east coast. I mean, if Lincolnshire was the sort of mountain capital of the world, we wouldn't have such a wet set of mountains, would we, with the prevailing conditions. But in the coming years, it's predicted that it's going to become even wetter. Now, that's bad enough for the lakes, isn't it? I mean, if you look at the rainfall in the lakes, it's not great. I did my Bob Graham attempt first week of May. I used the science. I did the first Saturday of May was my Bob Graham. It was a beautiful, clear day, and in fact, the first week of May traditionally is the driest period in the lakes. And then, of course, when everybody comes on holiday in July and August, the amount of rain is already starting to build up. And come Christmas time, it is pretty wet. Although for those of you who are out in the lakes today, it was glorious. I was out. It was very good. With water comes snow. Now, although there's not much snow in the lakes, there is snow in other parts of the UK, in particular in Scotland. There was a bit of snow up on the hills today. I was up on Fairfield. Anyway, so Scotland is the place for snow, and Scotland is a particularly dangerous place because of the changeable conditions. And when you compare it to the Alps with more stable weather conditions, it packs a real punch for its height because it's a predominantly, particularly in the west coast, it's a coastal climate. It takes an awful lot of changeable weather. You get huge dumps of snow, and often followed by very warm conditions. And you see what can be a very impressive freeze-thaw process, and you see this amazing ice on Ben Nevis. The 0.5 gully and the other amazing ice features on the Ben come into condition very, very quickly. But lower down the mountain at the heights of about 1,000 meters, you see this rapid thaw and melt and freeze. And this is just the perfect conditions for avalanches. All of them at around about 30, 35 degrees. And each year there are fatalities from avalanches. In 2022, over just 2 weeks, that's right, in 2 weeks, the last week of February, the first week of March, 7 people died in the Scottish mountains. And although many of them fell, there were a number also who died through avalanches. And it's that changing conditions that can be a real issue. This was one young man. This was Samuel Crawford. He was just 28. He fell. Those of you who know Ben Nevis and the tourist path, that is a common descent route for winter climbers. So the winter climbers on Ben Nevis normally climb on the northern side and then descend the tourist path or parallel gullies around the tourist path. And Samuel fell about 200 meters. He had crampons but slipped, and he fell over 200 meters. And 2 people who went after to try and help him also fell down the mountain. So not only did Samuel die, but 2 other, I think, military recruits also fell and suffered significant injuries as they were trying to capture him. And the point to make is, although these sound like small numbers, they're really affecting people who otherwise have not got They've got their whole lives in front of them. Samuel's 28. People, we've done some work looking back at the last 10 years of deaths in Scottish mountains in winter. And, over the course of 10 years, there's over 100 people. I'd say their ages mostly are between 18 and 50. These are people who, have gone out for a winter walk and have slipped and fallen or been caught in avalanches. The ice and the snow is a real problem. So look, finally, I'm just going to mention one last thing. We talked about weather, we talked about activity, medical history, location. That's right. I'm just going to return to location. So, anybody recognise this? This is the good thing about mountain medicine. Has anybody done the Skye, Traverse of the Coollands? The Alpine Ridge, that is better than anything in the Alps? That's what I say, yes. Anybody been up on there with their compass spinning round and round and round? Cursing that and the lack of GPS coverage because of the magnetic rock. The point is that although the British Isles is small, it's often very difficult to access some places. Skye is a good example. Often short distances, but taking long periods of time to travel. Lots of barriers, lots of water, lots of uneven surfaces, mud, steep ground, you name it. It seems to pack a punch on the UK hills. So, yes, the Skye. And you may well recognise this. Has anybody explored the slate mines of North Wales? There's a famous route called Snakes and Ladders. I cannot recommend it highly enough. The ladders are all there from the former slate mining days. And you can spend your days just wandering through the different offices and rooms from the slate mines. You go through certain old derelict buildings and people's donkey jackets are still there. Copies of newspapers from the 1970s are there. It's as if there was a point where suddenly everything stopped and people had to clear out. And Snakes and Ladders is a route that will take you through there. It's remote though, it's inaccessible. There's slate everywhere. You imagine trying to get an ambulance or even a mountain rescue team up into these places. And things like this, industrial archaeology, are becoming increasingly popular. People are going out and doing these interesting things and are going out into remote places. You've got people who are fascinated with ancient archaeology. You've got people now visiting air crash sites. There are whole books and websites dedicated to it. You've got people like me ticking trig points. You've got naturalists and twitchers and all sorts of people going out into the mountains, going to very, very remote locations and putting themselves at potential risk. So that sort of completes what I was going to say. So these are the four aspects: the weather, the activity, medical history, the location. All these things are influencing how mountain medicine, how we practice it, are changing through the British hills and mountains. And I think I'm going to stop there because I think there may be a few questions. But before I do, I just want to say something positive, because I spend a lot of time doing down the mountains, talking about how bad they are, how dangerous they are, how the illnesses and injuries that we encounter in them. But what we got to remember is the mountains are a fabulous place. We ran a conference last year called Hill Walking and Mental Health. And during the conference, what we did was to explore what the benefits are to people going into the hills. And those benefits are limitless. It's not just physical good health, but there's a huge mental health component. And despite all the problems that I've described tonight, there's a real positiveness about the mountains. One of our speakers was a lecturer from Stirling University. She works in a department sponsored by the Salvation Army up in Stirling. And she's been spending a lot of time looking at how can we use the mountains in a positive way with respect to mental health. And she describes another number of factors, key features that she believes benefit people, ways in which we can get the best out of our mountains. And she talks about green care, the idea of using the outdoors to improve health. And she talks about these factors. When we go into the mountains and the hills around us, this is what makes us feel better. And if we can somehow encapsulate, dare I say it, hill walking could be as effective I mean, it's recommended by NICE at the moment, but it's comparable to many of our treatments for anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder, mild depression, mental health problems. Getting out, exercising, enjoying the hills and mountains has the potential to be an enormous benefit to mental health. And what Wendy describes is getting out in the hills, that feeling of escape from day-to-day life that we all enjoy when we're out, the chance to reflect, the physical activity, the learning of new skills, that sense of purpose of climbing a mountain, the supportive relationship you have with perhaps with a leader, with a group leader, or even with a friend, the shared experiences with others. The mountains offer this, and they're out there, and we should be facilitating that, helping people get out there, but recognizing that potentially the mountains are a dangerous place and can result in illness and injury. But I think it's worth it, because I think the mountains can really help. They can change people's lives. So I'm going to finish there and say thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Will you take some questions?
Yes.
Anyone would like to ask a question? Yes. Yes. Yeah.
It's not a question. First, mentioned that the tick borne encephalitis was actually in New York, and I suspect there'll be other cases that there was something really odd about the case, because the guy concerned had been caving in Greece. So we all get a funny, weird zoonotic from being in a cave, and that's why his CSF was sent to Portland down. And then we realised the incubation periods were all wrong, so he must have acquired it locally, not in Greece. But they had a very interesting scan as well. So I suspect there's probably more of those, because ordinarily you wouldn't have sent his CSF to Portland down, because you see funny things like that every now and again. Yeah.
Should we all be getting ourselves vaccinated for going up in the lakes, or going up all these places for encephalitis?
Well, when the first case of Japanese encephalitis arrives, then we'll really know about it.
But nothing else.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much for great exposition on mountain medicine. You talk about calling out mountain teams for assistance, and that's quite a big deal. So when they get there, do you recommend that they, on the whole, scoop and run and bring them back, because that's quicker than staying and playing? Yeah,
I think that certainly is the way to go. Oh, sorry. How should I phrase that question for our online audience? How would you say?
Do you stay and play, or scoop and run?
So this is a question for mountain rescue teams. Should they stay and play, scoop or run? I would say scoop or run. A really interesting thing that's come out in the last couple of years is the reasons for call-outs, and that it's becoming increasingly common that people are now calling the mountain rescue team and have no physical injury or illness. There are numbers quoted often as high as a fifth or even a third of call-outs are actually there to help people who simply report being tired or lost. And this is going to be a real issue. And if you go to any of the popular mountain rescue teams' locations, it's a bugbear that they have. And I think that's really the bigger question to answer, is how can we reduce those sort of numbers? And scooping and running with those sort of people is the answer for them. Sorry, you got your hand up there.
Yes, so my question is, when I see your data, until your final slide, I had a very different take. I come from primary care, and when I see the amount of hill walking going up and your comments about mental health and not wanting to go out to that, what are you getting in terms of your mountain rescue, the counterfactual data of this increase in mountain walking, the mental health we're not seeing in primary care, the chronic disease being better managed in primary care from reduced problems actually in the community? Are you getting that feedback? Because the worry for me was you'll get echo chambered of the problems, the people come out with multiple comorbidities. But what you're missing is this increase in mountain activity is actually reducing the medical burden and the mental health burden for the rest of the population. Is there a way to get that data back to you? Because I worry that actually this is tremendously positive and you're just seeing the worst cases.
I think that's true. That's true. We've just started supporting primary care groups in Derbyshire to facilitate hill walking groups. So in the Hope Valley where I live, there are 6 practices. All 6 practices now have access to a outdoor bounds group who, through a charitable cause, are providing 10 places to each practice every week to have guided walks. Yeah, and it's worked very. It's sponsored by a RAB, which are a Sheffield company, and I want to support that. And they're finding that they have 6 organised walks once a week for 2 hours, normally in the mornings. And the remarkable thing is that after those 6 walks, many of them then continue walking together. So they form a group of about 10 normally, and they go out for these 6 walks, and then they carry on. And now there are WhatsApp groups forming, there's community groups forming, and just over the course of a year, you start to see more and more numbers going out and doing these things. So it's as if you're just giving people the nudge, the confidence to go out. And these are all people living in and around the Hope Valley, but you wouldn't believe it because they don't go out and use their hills normally. They do need genuinely showing where to go and what to do. But the report back from the feedback questionnaires have been tremendously positive. And you've got primary care providers who are opting for these measures first before starting antidepressants.
Well, they should, but there's more to that. So in that cohort, their weight will go down, their VO2 max will go down, their blood pressure will go down. We can be far more esoteric in this if we wish.
Yeah.
I'd love to get that data back. Do we have anything like that in the North York Moors?
No, it's starting in the lakes, though, in Cumbria. There's going to be schools. I'm also a great believer in the therapy of walking side by side with someone. Because I think it's really hard to talk to someone face to face.
I can't talk. I'll be hypoxic when I walk. I never talk when I walk.
Well, we'd only walk on the way down. But isn't there something about walking not eye to eye with people, and walking just allows that to happen so often. I mean, I confess and admit to all sorts of things. Side by side.
That's hypoxia as well.
I mean, Freud put people on a couch for a reason, didn't he? I think not to make eye to eye contact. And I think walking and that pace of walking as well, that rhythm that one gets into, I think is really valuable. So I think there's a lot to explore there. In our week, in our conference, our one-day conference, we had a speaker who spent a lot. She was a therapist who talked about the importance of eye movements and being able to communicate and talk. And she held a lot of her counselling sessions with people moving in rhythm. And she was a dancer by training, and everything was about rhythm and movement. And so there was something about the pace of movement that encouraged people to talk and to express themselves. Really interesting stuff.
I just wondered if anything's being done to actually tackle this kind of growing issue. People are going to mountains who are unprepared, either physically, mentally. I spend a lot of time in the hills. We see people who are clothed appropriately. They don't have, they're relying on iPhones in the hills when they don't have maps and compasses. And I just wonder, there's no kind of, I suppose, triage system or filter system. There's no to say you're not, equipped to go on the mountain. Yeah. But it sounds like, from what you're saying, there are an increasing number of people who are getting into trouble because they're lost or they're tired. It's not about physical injury, even mental health problems. They are just not prepared to go up on the mountain. Yeah. And I just wonder if mountain rescue teams or any other educational
Can you summarise the
opportunities are available to actually help deal with that?
Yeah, so the question is, what can be done to help and support people who aren't prepared for mountain activities? It's been interesting, over the last sort of 5 or 10 years, a number of things have been tried. There have been, at times, mountain rescue team members who have been positioned at the starts of popular routes. So in Edale, we've seen it for people going up onto Kinder Scout. I know it's happened in the lakes to an extent, but a lot of mountain rescue teams have felt that uncomfortable trying to do that. But on the other hand, I think it's a prime opportunity for National Trust or park volunteers to literally stand there at the car park and just ask people in a really friendly, informal way, where are you going today? What are you doing? The number of people who do go up on Scarfell in tennis shoes and bikini tops, it does happen. But it's about how you do it, isn't it? And
well, I have worn bikini tops. Nothing wrong with that.
I'm sure you look magnificent. But yeah, I think there is a real opportunity to use perhaps the voluntary sector for that, and it would be marshalling popular mountain routes, especially at weekends.
If you've got a mountain rescue team who's dealing with somebody who's lost, and somebody else gets into serious trouble, they're using a resource, a very valuable resource, which could be better employed.
Yeah, yeah.
There was a question at the back.
Well, it was more follow-on comment from that previous question. I think people have always gone to hills who have been underprepared. There may be more now than there were, I'm not sure. But people are calling mountain rescue teams much more easily these days because of mobile phones and so mountain rescue teams having to deal with much simpler, less traumatic incidents. The sort of thing we were talking about, I'm lost, I've got a dinner party at 5 o'clock and at 6 o'clock. Get me a helicopter, please. Or my wife's broken her little finger. That happened about 20 years ago to the Central Lakes teams, one of the Central Lakes teams. So it's already been happening, but you're probably seeing more of that now because of the people got mobile phones and they use them.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to ask Mark, who is our ex-president, to do the vote of thanks for you. And, I come from Keswick, so sort of I used to go out for cat bells and flip-flops.
Do you remember that? Do you remember that hottest day though? A couple of years ago.
Well, I wasn't there then, but I remember 1976 after A levels, all of us going up and getting a bit hot. Very hot as well.
I just very much, Jeremy. It was I would say a really good talk, really interesting. And one thing that struck me, you were talking about the health benefits of going up into the mountains, and I think you said that it was an opportunity to reflect, to have a clear sense of purpose, to have a shared facilitator. To meet like-minded people. It just felt like being at York Medical Society, except with mountains. But another question I wanted to ask was, we talked about all these injuries and so on, but how many of those are men? Because it struck me that a lot of these sports are completely bonkers, frankly, that people are taking part in now. I just wondered, is it mostly men doing them?
It's all men.
Oh, right. Yes, but having said that, a lot of them are quite appealing, and I must confess I've got an electric e-mountain bike, but maybe I'm one of those casualties.
Coming to your injury.
But it was very interesting, and a little bit of warning as well to all of us who decide to charge off into the mountains unprepared, and I think. But also some quite somber notes there, especially that chap who decided to take his life, and that was a tough one for whoever was involved with that. And I can see why the mountain rescue people don't want to get involved with that, because it's just unpredictable, isn't it, really? And I don't know if it's fair for anyone, really. But I'd just like to round off with thank you once again, and hope you can come back again for a third time next time.